Hi and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Caroline and obviously this is Caroline's Knits because in these videos I talk all about my love for knitting and I show what projects I have been working on. I am 25 years old and I live in Scotland with my partner Ben, but I am originally Danish, and in these videos, as I said, I show everything that I love, everything that I buy. I am definitely a garment knitter and I really like Scandinavian designers. Now that I've finished all the introductory part, I hope you'll stick around. It is currently the middle of April and it hasn't been all that long since I last filmed. You can always tell if my nails are the same colour, it probably hasn't been that long, but I thought I'd film today because we will hopefully in the next month be moving into our first house. That also means that this is probably the only square in the whole flat that hasn't turned into an absolute mess as we start preparing that whole process. So I wanted to film while I was certain that I would have the time to film and to sort of edit it, because it might be a little while before you see me again. So since last time, it's been about 2 weeks, I think, a bit over 2 weeks since I last filmed. So I haven't finished anything in that time. However, I promised that for this I would talk about my test knit for Knitting for Olive. For full transparency, when you test knit for Knitting for Olive, they always sponsor their yarns, because Knitting for Olive is also a yarn brand. So I got the yarn for this for free. I will put in the cutaway now. This is called the Darling Wrap or Darling Slåom, and it will be one of the patterns in the book that's being released in autumn. I assume it will also be translated, but who knows. I test knitted it in a 2XL. On the video I'll show you how I've tied it, but I actually think, I don't know if they're re-test knitting my size, but I think they'll make some slight adjustments to the fit. It is, as the name sort of describes, in Darling Wrap. It's a wrap cardigan. So it's knitted in 2 purl, 2 knit ribbing. You knit bottom up. So you actually start by knitting these long ties. You'll also be able to notice I am covered in a blanket because it's really cold. Yeah, as I said, you knit the ties first and then you connect it to the body. And then you knit the body up. You do decreases along here on both sides. Then you knit each sleeve separately, put them together, do raglan decreases while you're still decreasing for the front. Then you do some short row shaping on the neck so that it sits right. And then finally you do a tiny I-cord bind off at the very top of the neck. So I think the construction of this was really interesting and like nothing I had ever done before. It took a long time. I started this in the middle of January and I finished it at the very end of March. Some of that was also because I was waiting for some pattern help from Knitting for Olive. There was a number error, which is obviously to be expected. I would probably say if I was to knit it again, I'd still assume easily a 2 months of knitting. I also think for me, the 2 purl, 2 knit ribbing, I hadn't expected, or 2 knit, 2 purl ribbing, I hadn't expected it to be so hard on my wrists. So I found that I couldn't exclusively knit on this, so I got sore wrists. So this was a true knitting Mount Everest for me. To be completely honest, I had, because it's bottom up, you have to actually be really far in the pattern before you can try it on. That's why I really like, you know, top-down constructions, because I think you have a much better feel for how it's coming together than I really feel like I did with this, because the first time I tried it on, I had attached both sleeves and I was probably around here. It was just, you don't have much of a feel with how it's really looking. And when it was very first finished, I will put in some pictures now of how I tied it on the first day that I tried it on. So you actually have a hole to put through the tie at the very bottom, and you meant to, I guess, tie it at the back. It just didn't sit tight, and I was a bit surprised because obviously with ribbing you can have quite a lot of negative ease and it should still fit. That's obviously how you get tight ribbing on sleeves and stuff, but it just fit a little bit big. And I have to be honest and say, very first time I put on a truly finished garment, I was actually not that happy with it. I just thought the fit was a little bit off, and it wasn't as flattering as I had expected it to be. Then I took a look at how the other test knitters had worn it, and I realised that just like I have done today, it's probably wrinkled up a little bit, but it seems that the trick is actually that you tie it in the front like this. So you wrap it across the back. I'll put in a picture now of what that looks like. I put that up on my Instagram as well. And then tie it in the front, and that way the tie actually sits in your waist itself, and I think that's much more flattering. Because I do think this style of like wraps are really, really flattering on someone that has a bit more of a bust. Even if you don't have a bust in general, I just think it's a really forgiving shape, and most people, a V-neck is really flattering. And obviously being able to tie in the waist is also good, so that you can hide a bit of a floppy stomach but still have waist definition. And I know it's flattering because my mum wrote to me and said, I would like one exactly like that, Karoline, it's really beautiful. And that's the first time of anything I've knitted that she said I'd really like it. I'm not sure I will be jumping to knit it anytime soon, so but anyway, I thought it was a big compliment from my mum. Anyway, I gave feedback that I thought it was a wee bit too long, so I think they'll take some of the length off. And I also fed back that, so as I said, I also fed back that I thought they could take out some of the width in the belly area and have a wee bit more positive ease, just to get a slightly better fit. So I think they'll slightly readjust some of the pattern once it gets published. The sleeves were spot on, so obviously as they knit bottom up, I thought it was really hard to guess whether they were the right length, and actually sleeves are the one thing in patterns that I usually add length to, so but I think these are perfect. And the same with the armpit, it's not like all the way up in my armpit, but it's also not loose. That's something I personally have found that can be quite a big problem for me. I still think there would be plenty of room, because I actually said to Knit Flitter, I was like, well, I don't feel like I'm that typical or 2XL, and she's like, I've never heard anyone that's a 2XL say they're typical, so maybe that's just sort of how it is. And I think that could probably be true. So for example, I think I have a lot of bust, and I tend to be quite wide, especially all the way up here, so often like I have maybe a tiny bit wider shoulders, but then and I also carry like weight, especially on my chest and on my legs, but I don't think I carry that much, for example, on like my biceps and the lower parts of my arms. So sometimes I found like especially something like the Wednesday sweater, if they have like a really dropped armpit, it can be really dropped for me because there isn't actually that much for me to fill out. I also guess I don't carry that much weight around my belly. Of course, as I have gained weight, I carry more and more, but that is certainly not my widest point. So yeah, I guess if you were curious what type of 2XL I am, that's why I would say. I'm also always happy to provide measurements. You can always just write to me on social media, and I'm always happy to like to model what I've made or to tell you about certain size, because I always find it really helpful. But just to say that I think for me the sleeves, for example, are perfect, but there's still room. So I think that's generally about the fit. Now that I have managed to tie it differently, I feel so much happier with it. And I think that was really just what was needed. I think I had really high expectations because it was such a big piece of work, and looking back, I'd probably set myself up to be a little bit disappointed, but now that it's done, I feel really, really happy with it. And I think now that it's tied in the waist, it's really, really pretty. And this will be such a useful piece in my wardrobe, which is also why when I saw they were looking for test knitters, I was really happy to test knit this, because I just know I can style this up and down. And after that initial day, I actually wore it for several days in a row, just because it's easy. It's easy to wear. It looks great on video, of course. And yeah, it's really good. It works with jeans and with skirts, etc. So I have worn it a lot. I don't have the specific balls for this, but let me just find you something that looks like it. So this is knitted in one strand of knitting foil of merino and one strand soft silk mohair. This is a different colour that I'll talk about later for my current project. This colour is plum rose. I can be a bit funny. I really love pinks, but I do think that that kind of true powdery pink can wash me out a little bit. I am obviously very fair, and with the blonde hair, there's just some pinks I think can slightly clash with my hair. But I think this colour is that it's just dark enough that I don't think it washes me out at all. I actually think it really complements my complexion. So yeah, I used one strand of each. I used just under 6 for each. The sort of estimated amount was spot on, which is always good. I think I had a whole ball left of merino, about 25 grams left of it. So I used about 5.5 balls of merino, and I used basically 6 full skeins of the soft silk mohair. But still with enough to spare that it wasn't like, oh, I couldn't, you know, it wasn't yarn chicken level at all. So I always think that's good. As I've said before, it's worth keeping in mind that knitting in these type of qualities, so merino, knitting for Olive's merino runs 250 meters by 50 grams, and a soft silk mohair will probably run about 220 by 25 grams. It actually means that even though Knitting for Olive, I think, is one of the more expensive brands, you get a lot of yardage for your money. And so something like this will probably cost you about, in my size, probably about £90, a tiny bit less. And considering that Knitting for Olive cares a lot about ethical standard, some of the things they're doing with my hair and silk are really interesting. Well, I think it is Okotex, which is basically Knitting for Olive has really strong ethical foundations, and I would recommend you to take a look. But it is something I think worth mentioning, because if you are a bit picky with sort of the sustainability of the brands you buy from, Knitting for Olive are really good, and in these type of qualities you can knit fairly big garments for not as much money as you would say in an Erin weight or similar. I should probably finish off with like how these feel, because Stitchology asked me how does the silk mohair feel against my skin, because just like me, she's really interested in finding like alternatives to mohair, or find mohairs that aren't itchy. I have spoken about this before, but I am very sensitive to mohair. In general to wool, if I'm honest. And to me it seems to be a day by day thing. Some days I can wake up and I can wear lots of things against my skin, and some days it's just like this morning I put on a sweater I have worn probably with nothing underneath before, just lying in the flat, no problem at all, and today I put it on and it was just itchy everywhere. It's very up and down for me, and that's also why I have become very conscious that when I make things, I want them, if there's mohair in it, I need to be able to have a layer underneath. And I actually really like this for that, because you'd be able to wear a shirt. I'm the most sensitive around my neck and on like my upper shoulders, and the least sensitive down my arms. And I have worn this out and about with a strappy top, perfectly fine. I've worn it with a t-shirt, perfectly fine. I have to say though that I am always more sensitive when I'm just sat at home. I don't know if I've just gotten too used to comfort, but I did find that itchy. Like I could feel it just like slightly on my arms. So I don't think Knitting for Olive soft silk mohair, like it is definitely soft, it's nice to the touch, and they do amazing colours, but for me this is still itchy. Again, not to the point I can't wear it, I just have to think about how and when I wear it. So for example today, I have solved it by just wearing a long sleeve top underneath, and I get that warmth and I can have it, you know, against some of my skin, but not constantly be wanting to scratch my skin. So I would knit in this again. As you can tell, I'm clearly in this colour. Yeah, it's been a long ride, and one thing I really hope shows up is this is one of the fluffiest ever. I think the silk mohair gives such beautiful halo, and probably the most halo of anything I own. So that's what I finished. I actually finished 3 projects in March, so I've been able to spread it out a little bit, and all I can say is it's not common for me to finish 3 projects in 1 month. Now that we're moving on to my sort of works in progress, my whips, I think it's fair to say that I have definitely discovered I quite like knitting on several things. I think I tend to knit on one thing a day. I very much get into the groove with the project and then work on it, but I have actually really been enjoying, just like I did with this. I was knitting the Wednesday sweater at the same time, I just really enjoyed that I can have some things that are like proper telly knits, right? It's just round and round and round, just stockinette stitch. And I can have something that I can knit while I watch other knitting podcasts, or if I just need a bit of a break or something that's a slightly more involved. So I think I'm going to continue with that, and I will show you the two projects that I have currently been working on. So last time I showed you this, it was, I think I just cast on for the neckline. This is, and I'm test knitting this, so just for full transparency, as I'm test knitting it, I have of course received the pattern for free, but I have paid for the yarn myself. So this is the office sweater from KnitFlitter, designed by a lady called Nina, who actually lives really close to my mum, which is quite funny. So the office sweater is, in general, I think I've spoken about this before, but Nina very much designs timeless and classic patterns with a real focus on construction. So the last time I spoke to you, I had finished the neckline and I was about to start all the sort of increases and decreases, and it didn't go that well. I hadn't read the pattern fully, and that's obviously always like the number one reason why you make mistakes, at least it is for me. And so you do some of the increases and I hadn't read the in total, meaning I did 16 rounds of a certain type of increase that I shouldn't have. And when I realized that, it's like I will live with 1 or 2 stitches being off, not if I'm test knitting, because with test knitting obviously the designer looks for your feedback, and if you haven't knitted a right garment then they can't really use your feedback. So I probably wouldn't with this, but had it not been a test knit, I would probably, you know, 1 or 2 stitches I would probably just have lived with. But obviously this was like a significant chunk off, right? Like we're talking 30-40 stitches that I had too many, and I had really wanted to finish the hard part of the increases while I was still off for my Easter holidays, because I was like, oh, I could get through so much when I get to the stockinette and we're just watching the telly. And I realized when I realized I made the mistake, there was obviously nothing else to do but to rip it back. I have said this before, but I absolutely despise frogging, and I generally avoid it at essentially every cost. That's also why I accept that my knitting is never perfect. This has mistakes, other things have mistakes, and I just kind of live with it. It just doesn't bother me that much. I generally in the rest of my life, I'm a elusive perfectionist that can't let things go. With knitting, I just don't feel that way at all. And I can't explain why. So I tried to rip it back, and then obviously the increases are rackling. So you do on the rounds, some of the increases I dropped a wee bit more than I expected, and the stitch count still didn't match. And then I ripped it. I realized that actually at the very end of the next short row shaping, I had also made an increase too many, so I had to rip it even further back. And this was several days of me trying to fix this problem, and I wasted a lot of Easter being really angry at it. When I find mistakes, this is the one place where I'm really not chill, really bothers me. So I ripped it further back to the short rows, and the stitch count, I just dropped some stitches and I couldn't pick it back up, and I was like, it was still off, you know, the stitch count didn't match on the front, back and sides, and I was like, I have now ripped back so much, I may as well start over. And if I could do something over instead of wasting, you know, 4 or 5 days of really good knitting time trying to fix the problem, I should just have started from the very beginning. It would have been quicker and I would probably have gone further. So this was put in the pile of shame until I could really face it, just because I was so cross with myself and angry at it. And it's not very constructive, but it is what it is. Ben said it was like watching someone go through grief, like the anger and the acceptance and all of those things, as I kind of just realized that the only thing I could really do was just to start over. And so I did. Last week I cast on for the neck and just completely started over. And it's funny because I will talk a bit more about the construction in a minute, but when I started over, things that had seemed really complex to me in the construction first time around was now much easier. And it took me half the time to knit some of the sections just because I knew exactly what I was doing. Alma Knit, which is a Danish company that makes like knitting patterns specifically to you, had put up this video where they kind of talked about how to use stitch markers to keep track of your increases. And essentially what you do is that you put, once you do the first increase, you put a marker. And that means that as you knit more and more increases, you can obviously count how many you've made. And this seems really obvious now, but I don't know why I had never thought of it, because another problem I had when I discovered the mistake is this is obviously dark grey. And it's fussy dark grey on small needles. And reading the knitting on this is so hard. But once I had that stitch marker, it just became so easy to keep track of. It meant I could say, it's still matching, it's still matching, it's still matching. So I actually use that all throughout, and it's that's my biggest recommendation is put a stitch marker when you start the increases, because in this construction you don't actually do the increases in the same like frequency all the way down the shoulder. So you start off with you do a saddle shoulder at the very beginning, where you take out more towards the front and back than you do on the shoulder itself. And you also do short row shaping, which is a bit hard to see because it's lying, but the neck will be considerably higher once it's finished, so that you get a good fit. So you start with the saddle shoulder, where you take out more towards the front and back than towards the shoulder. Then you move into a different section where you increase the frequency, where you change the frequency of increases and decreases. So it starts becoming more of a true raglan. And then at the very, very end, in my size, you have even more a different frequency. So for my size, you have to do 3 different types of frequency of increases, and that can be a lot to keep track of. I can already tell that this is going to be really nice when it's done, because obviously you're going to have a nice tight fit just here on the shoulder, then it's going to go out a little bit, and I think that would be really, really nice. It's a really interesting construction. And to be honest, once I kind of got the hang of it, this was still fine teleknit. As Knit Flitter said to me, the hardest part is when you're doing the short rows, because you're obviously knitting over some of the stitches more than others, and it's the frequency as to what stitches needs increased is a bit funky. But she describes that in the pattern, and you can literally follow line for line, and I really appreciate that she took the time to spell that out. Because I think further down she doesn't as much, but it's not needed because you've already tried it. But for the short rows, it's really good that someone tells you, you know, knit this far, then you turn, you do increases here, then you turn and you do increases here, and you can just do it over and over till you're all done. So this is just a wee bit over a week of knitting. I have deliberately been knitting loads of this because I started this as part of there's a cow knit along that ends today, called The Curse of the Home Office Cow, that I have been taking part in. And that's why I asked Nina if she would grade up to my size. So this will be a 2XL. I think she calls this a size F in her patterns. She also has an office cardigan that uses the same shoulder construction, but then obviously has buttons, which already comes in that size. So she actually asked me at the time if I would want to test knit it, but I am not a big cardigan person, so sweater's the way to go for me. So yes, so far so good. I split for sleeves on Wednesday, and then you can see how much I've managed here. I am just knitting. This has very much been telly and meeting knitting now, because it is round and round and round and round and round and round. So my plan is to do is to finish the rest of the thicker strand, and then I will probably knit the 2 sleeves. Just as a refresher, the yarn that I am using is 2 new qualities for me. Actually, I'll keep this here so you can see when I describe what's sort of new to me. So this has a very, very similar gauge to this and other sort of, you know, it's a fingering weight, help with the lace weight. So this combo is obviously very similar to a lot of patterns that you will see on quite small needles. But it just has like a lightness. That's the only way I can describe it. It just feels not thick at all. I think it won't be see-through, but you can almost see how light it is, especially when you compare it to what is, you know, the same sort of needle size. I'm just gonna pull these through just in case. Like this is just so much thicker. It has a completely different type of drape, and I really enjoy it. You know, it still has a bit of a halo like you get with mohair, but I think it'll be really soft. So the 2 yarns that I'm using is from Isère. This is also what KnitPro is currently knitting in the curl, and a few other people did. So I thought I would try a quality I'd never tried before. So I'm knitting in 1 strand of Alpaca 1 from Isère and 1 strand of Alpaca 2 from Isère, both in the colour 4S, which is a grey, very dark grey. Alpaca 1 is 100% alpaca, and it runs 50 grams for about 400 meters. So this is essentially 1 strand of like same thickness as a mohair, and I think you could replace this like for like with mohair. It's obviously worth noticing that while you get like it has about the same thickness, most mohairs come in 25 grams, and this obviously comes in 50 grams, so you actually need half the amount of Alpaca 1. I also think Alpaca 1 would do really well held with like fluffy yarns like this, like 1 strand, in patterns that calls for 2 to 3 strands of mohair for a bit of structure while still being quite fluffy and light. So it certainly isn't the last time that I knit in Alpaca 1. The second strand is Alpaca 2. So Alpaca 2 is 50% alpaca and 50% wool, and it runs 50 grams is 250 meters, so that's the same as Knitting for Olive's merino actually, which is all tangled up down here. But yeah. So again, can be replaced like for like. I do think they have a slightly different look, so this is almost cabled, I guess. I'll hold it up slowly, see if you can see it. So it has a tiny bit of a different structure, but I think it does give a wee bit of structure to like the pattern itself. So yeah, really nice combo, and I think it'll be quite a timeless model and a timeless colour. So I do wonder, it doesn't look as even currently, but I think the stitches will lie really nicely after the wash, so I'm really happy with this. And as I mentioned before, similar to if you buy sort of Knitting for Olive, and you know, this kind of combo is fairly affordable considering how nice quality yarns you get. I think these 2 combinations, Alpaca 1 and Alpaca 2, I think I paid about £75, and I ordered, so I think there will be more than enough. I have managed to knit this far using one whole skein of Alpaca 1 and another one of Alpaca 2, the thicker one, and I have basically, you almost can't see, I've used one of the second bore of Alpaca 1, and you can see I have still quite a bit left of Alpaca 2, so I haven't used that much so far, so I don't think I'll need much of a whole sweater. I am knitting it on 4.5mm needles. The recommended needle size in the pattern is 4mm, but I couldn't hit gauge, and I'll speak a bit about that in a minute when I talk about my second project, but I just think I knit really tight on smaller needles. I just don't think I'm as used to them, and I think my tension is a bit tighter. It was the same for this. I also needed to go up a needle size, half a needle size, to hit gauge on this, so that just seems to be common for me. I must just grip the needles really tight, so hopefully the next time I see you this will be done. So the second project I am working on, I had similarly last time only done like the colour off, but as you can tell I managed a bit more. This is the Fern sweater, or the Breine sweater, by Knitting for Olive. It has these it's like this lace panel, I don't know if you can tell, where you have these yarn over, that's what they're called, and you do some increases and decreases to almost create these panels. I am knitting this in Knitting for Olive Soft Silk Mohair and Merino in the colour Claret or Vinwald. Really beautiful colour, especially now that they're knitted together. I think the silk mohair gives a bit of almost a sheen to the colour. You can almost see it if I hold these up together, how it gives a wee bit more than just a merino on its own. So really enjoying this, really enjoying the colour. This is my, if I could only knit in one colour for the rest of my life, it would be this kind of dark red. Yeah, so I did a folded down colour. I'm just going to see, that's the very back. So I knitted to 8 centimeters, and then I knitted it down so that it's a double folded colour. And I have tried it on. Ben thought I looked ridiculous because I did it on top of like the chunky dahlia. No, I think it was worse than that. I actually think it was the Wednesday sweater, so I had like a roll neck knitted jumper underneath, but I wanted to make sure that it did fit. And I did it because, as I mentioned, I'm the most sensitive on my neck, and I love the idea of the high necks and roll necks, but I just don't think I'd wear it, because once it has that roll neck, I removed the chance to wear a sweater or like a you know, something like this underneath, or like a high t-shirt to help, and as well as the shirt. So for work, for when I look a bit more prim and proper, I do really like wearing shirts underneath sweaters. It's probably one of my sort of favorite ways to style knitwear, so I knew that folding it down would just make so much more sense for me. I didn't really think it completely through, because I realized once I'd finished the collar that actually before you finish the ribbing, so it has a roll neck usually, you actually do short row shaping in ribbing to get, again, that higher neck at the back. And so I just decided to just do it in stockinette. I think right now you can see this is the back of it. It is quite obvious because obviously you have like a panel of stockinette before you really start with the pattern. But I just feel like once it's been washed and it sits all the way high up in my neck and it's at the back, no one is ever gonna look at this and think, wow, she really didn't plan that short row shaping correctly. Especially because, of course, it is only on the back. So if you look at the front here, there isn't, you start basically straight into pattern or into the lace. So I think it'll be fine. As always with this kind of knitting, you can almost see how it almost reminds me a bit of an octopus or something. It's all like, it kind of clumps up a little bit. Again, it's probably because it's also stuck on small needles. But yeah, again, everything looks nicer when it's blocked, and I think this will be one of those that really shows how beautiful it is when it's blocked. This was my saving grace when the office sweater was in the pile of shame, because it gave me something else to focus on while I was getting over having to start all over, which I really do not like. So yeah, I knitted vast majority of that when I was waiting for the office sweater. I have to say, I knit most things watching the telly. Most of the chunky dahlia was knitted while watching telly, so I am probably like quite relaxed about. Like, I don't need it to be completely mindless. However, I have to say, I have definitely noticed, like currently we're watching The Expanse on Amazon and Amazon Prime, and I have to say I can really see how much more I'm taking in of the show. So The Expanse is this show that takes place in the future in space, and there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of politics and stuff, and I have to say the office sweater, I remember more of the episodes when I've knitted on that. So this has been currently been demoted a little bit, but I think I don't really mind, because I like that one of my projects, and I think I will continue this, is, you know, stockinette, fairly simple, like from now on it's just mindless knitting till it's done. And then you have something like this that will have, this pattern is all across the sweater, even the sleeves, right? So this is always going to be a bit more involved, and even though I think over time you obviously start to recognize and know how to do it, so it's definitely more mindless now than it was the first time I did a round, but it's still not completely mindless. So I think I'll just save it for when I knit on my own and I watch knitting podcasts, or last night Ben and I sat in bed and listened to an audiobook, and this is perfect because it's mindless enough that I think you can listen to something and take it in. Like, you don't have to constantly be counting your stitches, but I do find that it's a lot easier to do the rounds with the pattern in it when you can look, because then you can see where the stitches should go. As you may also be able to tell, I have done like stitch marker galore, and that's probably one of my top tips if you knit lace. I did it on chunky dahlia too, and I think it helps you keep track of not making any mistakes, because, you know, you just repeat over and over and over. So I do love a good stitch marker, especially if you're trying to do it while watching the telly. I did also have a mistake somewhere in this, and I'm really proud of that I managed to fix it actually. So I had done some yarn overs that hadn't fallen right. I'm not really sure what I'd done. I'd probably been too busy like watching someone in The Expanse. And when I discovered it, I actually wrote to Knit Yarns and I was bloody gutted because it was like 3 or 4 rows back. And I was like, I wouldn't frog this because I wouldn't trust myself to pick up the stitches. So I was like, what do I do? Like, it was obvious enough, I think I would notice. And as I said, I'm really not that bad for being, you know, some people just can't leave any mistake. And there's plenty of times there's things I have left that I have seen other people would rip back for. But again, essentially what I'd done was almost like there was several yarn overs in one row, and no, it wasn't good. So I spoke to Knit Yarns and she's like, well, you could probably sew it together and see how that looks. Or you could try and drop the stitches and see how you can pick it up. And that's actually, I was like, well, if I'm sewing it together, like, that will probably work, but the best solution will be to drop the stitches. So that's what I did. I dropped them very carefully and I picked it up, and now I can actually no longer see where it was. At the time it didn't look completely even, but a lot of these tension things evens out in the wash, I find. So yeah, I felt really proud because, as I said, I'm probably not the best at fixing mistakes when I really should be. So yeah, I felt really proud of like dropping the stitches and picking them all up. I'm glad, because now there's no more mistakes that I've spotted. I'm sure there will be more. I also find that yarn overs are funny because sometimes I think they look slightly bigger and smaller on different rows, but that also looked much better on the dahlia after it was washed. I also have a confession to make. I always gauge swatch. Like, I really truly do always gauge swatch. I just have seen too many people who said I didn't, and then they like hold up a jumper and it's like the size for like that would fit a baby, or the exact opposite. Obviously if you completely misgauge, you also can't count on how much yarn you need. And my biggest fear is always running out of yarn. I always buy several balls of yarn more than I really need because I don't want to, you know, run out. But this I haven't. I just decided to go for it because they don't actually describe what kind of pattern that you should do it in, so I just went for it. And then as like by E kindly, well, her idea was, why don't you sort of measure it as you've started knitting and see if you're completely off, and I'm not. So after wash, I know it can slightly change, but now it's more or less spot on. So I'm knitting this in a 2XL, which should be on the slightly, like, it will have more positive ease. So I knew that the biggest danger for me, I assume, would be to knit too tight. As I said, I usually knit too tight on small needles, so I assumed that if I was going to have a gauge problem, it'd be slightly too small. So at least by knitting a size up, I should have enough room. And I think I'll do the exact same on this. I am probably by now about 10-15 rows away from splitting for sleeves, and when I do that I will knit the 2 sleeves and then knit the body when I know how much yarn I have left. So that's my current plan. The only thing is, this is also on 4.5mm needles, and that's not something I'm going to do again, because as I said, I think I tense my hands a lot more on the smaller needles than thicker needles. So when I knitted this, for example, I started getting sore wrists, and it's not like that. It's not like carpal tunnel feeling at all. I can just feel my hands can feel a bit fatigued, like I've just worked out too much kind of feeling, especially across here. And I think it's from sitting, like clenching it, being certain it's just going to slip out. There's not too much difference in how it feels to knit them. So I think going forward, one of my projects should be on slightly different needles, just one size up and down. And this is another good tip on both of these, actually, also on the office sweater. My right needle is 4.5 and my left needle is a 4mm, and that's just to have more room. I find stitches glide better, and if, like me, you have quite tight knitting, I just find it moves much better on my left needles, and then I notice a lot less that it's tight on the right needle, and it also gives more room. So on this you often knit 2 things together and stuff, and there's just more room. and for short rows it does even out tension issues slightly more. On this I can still slightly see it, but I think that'll even out on the wash. So yeah, that is the two main projects that I've been working on. I don't plan to, well, I'm not planning to cast anything on. I am bloody desperate to knit sweater number 15, I'm not gonna lie. It is definitely on my list, and I'm really keen to do a gauge swatch with this yarn in my stash that I think I might be able to use single strand. And if that's the case, then that will probably be next, and I will probably buy yarn for that too. However, hasn't happened yet, and I actually don't have any yarn to show you today. So now that I've spoken about, you know, we were reaching the final part, and thank you if you've stuck with me, because I think I've chatted a lot about the knitting itself today. Really chatted. I didn't think it was going to be a long one, but then I always think that. But I haven't bought any yarn. Obviously it hasn't been that long since I last saw you, and last time I bought 3 sweater quantities of yarn, right? So there wouldn't really be much need as of yet to buy something. However, something I wanted to ask what you think about and hear your experiences is about knitting needles. So Naptime Knitter and I have actually spoken quite extensively about knitting needles. She is a Chalgoo person. She just bought the full set of that and has been like, wow, I love it. And I was asking because when I very first started knitting, Ben bought me Symphony needles. So Symphony are these like KnitPro Symphony are these like coloured wood. And I've collected a few. I've also tried KnitPro's, these are plastic. And they're actually quite decent. They're usually really affordable. So I've tried those. I've also tried ponies. These I struggle to get hold of in the UK. So the reason I wanted to try pony is that quite a lot of people in Denmark really like pony needles. And they are, I saw pop knitting with them, and I really like this sort of tip and how sharp they are. So I bought these as well. I have a few different sizes, but as I have to buy them individually, find that a bit annoying, and it's hard to get all the sizes. And these can be really sharp. I've had to file just the very tips of them, otherwise I hurt my hands. So basically I have been trying loads of different kinds of needles to kind of start getting a feel for what's my preferred type of needles. And I would really like to do more chats about knitting needles because I think it's really hard when you get into it. And I really enjoyed, I think KnitPro are really good value for the money. A set of Symphony needles, and these ones I'm about to show you, you get for about £40, at least if you buy them. Most places I've seen about £40 plus minus £5. You get a complete set from 3.5 to 8mm. Yeah, 3.5 to 8mm, and that will cover you for the vast majority of your projects. Oh god, it's the ice. Do you remember the ice cream man was here last time as well? And so I can only recommend doing that because if you're gauge swatching, being able to go up and down half a needle size without having to like go out and buy what they call like fixed circulars really saves you money. Also because you get, you know, when I still remember when I first knitted a Sunday sweater, I'd written down all the needle sizes that I needed, all the lengths and whatever she'd put in the pattern, and you know, it's like 5 or 6 needles. That's so impractical. Now for a project I usually don't have to buy needles at all. I sometimes invest in like neck circumference, so they're 40 centimeters knitting needles. I have actually found a new favorite of those, which, apologies, this is the not so pretty side of knitting, is it? That's where all my knitting needles and whatnot lives. These are actually my favorite 40 centimeters, so I have been buying more and more of these. I always buy these on Amazon. You can usually get them for about under £4-ish, around the £4 mark for 40 centimeter, which I think is really good. I really like them because they have that curve. So this is also an acquisition because I've actually bought that for these two projects. This is a 4.5, yeah, 4.5. But I really like that curve because it gives me more length. I realised that I quite like long knitting needles. I think a reason why I struggle to get on with the very short circulars is that I can't have a proper grip. But I really like these. They are like some kind of coated metal. they're aluminium and have a smooth finish, and aluminium is obviously good if you have sensitivity to metals. And it's like, for me, this is like an in-between between like a true, like really like slick metal needle to the sort of more grippy wood. So yeah, I really recommend these pony ones, and the cord is really nice and comfy too. So yeah, these are good. So I've been buying those, but generally I don't. However, I realised that obviously for these two projects, I need a 4.5 for both. And I could have done, you know, if I'd just stuck to Symphony, I could have had one 4.5 on one project, you know, on the right hand needle on one project, and then a size down on the other. But I've been really keen to try more metal, because I find with my Symphony, you obviously have the join in them, and I find it very much depends on each needle. Some of them I have no problems with, but some of them they catch. So when you know, push right here, they kind of get stuck, and it really annoys me. I also found that, so for example, when I knitted a Chunky Dahlia, I knitted one on 7mm, and obviously the ribbing was on 6mm, and I switched over, and the two needles felt completely different. My 7mm have seen a lot more wear, and they just didn't feel slick at all. They just didn't. It was like I'd picked up a completely different kind of needle. So I've kind of been put off them a little bit because of that join, and because I find that I just don't think the slickness is that good. I will also say that one thing I do not like about KnitPro is that their cables are really stiff, and that they are very prone to memory. So you often get, like I've especially struggled with it on this project, because as I said, this yarn is so light, and you just get quite bad bends in it. And if it's a really heavy project, they even out a lot quicker, because you obviously have the weight of the project on them. But with this, for example, I spent ages with like a weird kinked up cable, and I know you can put them in hot water and stuff, but it could also be avoided. However, all of that said, I also didn't feel like shelling out, you know, 150 on a new set, just because I was like, I really want to make sure I really do like metal before I buy like a Tiago or like a Higher or some of the more expensive brands. Another problem that I have is that I am nickel allergic. I am not as nickel allergic as some, so I can wear like most common jewellery, so I guess I can survive like traces of it. But I'm allergic enough that, fun fact is that at least back in the day, Fitbit, they had up here, this was like, didn't have nickel in it, so this part of the watch was fine, but the clasp on the Fitbit had nickel in it. And they said that on the package, I just hadn't seen it. And I worn it once to work out, and I was covered in like contact eczema from just where the watch had been. Just from that tiny little clasp on the watch, it had spread all underneath the watch as I was working out. So I'm also aware that with knitting needles, I could potentially have the same reaction, that if my hands are sweaty and I'm knitting on metal with nickel in it, that I could have a problem. When I very first started knitting, and I still to this day, I don't know if it's connected or not, but I got a specific type of eczema on this finger underneath where I wore a ring. And I've always said, oh, there's no way it could be knitting needles, but I actually think this is more or less where the join on my knitting needles sits. And I used to knit a lot on KnitPro Basics, and they have like this beautiful gold join, and then I read somewhere that that's a nickel join. So I do wonder if I had that reaction because I knitted a lot on, you know, a join with nickel in it. And that kind of scared me a little bit, because that eczema was really hard to get rid of. It's one where your skin, you essentially get blisters, and they itch a lot. So yeah, I've been very self-conscious of it, and obviously it's always hard on your hands. So all of this to say that the main acquisition is I decided to try, well, I bought the KnitPro Zing set. So this is the case they come in. I saw someone saying that they thought that plastic case that the Symphonies come in is so hideous, they'd thrown out as soon as it arrived. It's not the prettiest, right? It's not like one of those beautiful leather cases, but they're quite practical. But yeah, this is what they come in. So you get that little pouch. Then you have the needles up here. You can see, obviously I'm using 2 different sizes. So just like the Symphonies and these sets, you get from 3.5 to 8mm, and I think you can buy chunky sets. The good thing about KnitPro is that they're so widely available in the UK, and the Zings are, I can't remember what the Zings are made of. I think it's also aluminium. They have some kind of coating that will be nickel free, because I really like the KnitPro Novas, but I've heard that the KnitPro Novas might have more traces of nickel in it, so that's not really an option for me. I also like these because they're slick, but they are also not as slick as the Novas. So if you've never seen the Novas before, I do apologise. I knitted on this ages ago and dropped the stitch and I still haven't properly picked it up. But these are Novas, so they are pure metal, with no proper coating. Anyway, I've decided to give these a go to see how I get on with metal. So far so good. When I very first started knitting, I had a few metal ones and I got such sweaty hands, apologies for the TMI, that I wasn't sure they were going to be for me, but yeah, I'm staying hopeful. But I also wanted to know if, first of all, if I keep buying knitting needles, would you be interested in me talking about knitting needles? What I really struggled with when I was looking for reviews was finding people who knit similarly to me. So I am, first of all, a continental knitter, but I've learned that I'm a Norwegian continental knitter, which means when I knit, I have the yarn very close to my work. I don't use fingers to push, so I don't, break through my skin. So that's not really a concern for me, but I do need something that moves quite well. I have also noticed that over time I have developed a preference to knit very close to the tip of my left needle. So I also don't want something so slick that, they just and all the stitches off. So first of all, would you be interested in hearing more about knitting needles? And second of all, what's your favourite knitting needles? Are there any kinds you think I would absolutely love based on what I've talked about today? If you do have nickel allergies, do you knit with set of needles like metal needles or whatever? Because obviously in wooden needles, you still, even the symphonies, right, they still have a metal join. So just because you knit on wood, you're not really safe necessarily. I would like to try some that have a slightly nicer cable, because I do think my pony needles that are also interchangeable have, and also the non-interchangeable ones, but the pony cables I really like. They're very soft and squishy. But this is just so affordable. Like this set I bought on Amazon. I won't link them because, well, Amazon's bad, isn't it? But it's also so convenient. So this is from Amazon. And I think I paid £38 for this bigger set. You can see I haven't taken out the cables because I already own loads of cables and they're easy to buy more of. I thought I'd show you these and talk about them, and I'm kind of excited to knit a bit more on them and get a bit of a better feel for how I feel on them. I have not knitted any really big, I've gone for metal before for smaller projects, but I haven't actually tried knitting on like the very big sizes on like in metal. So I think one of my next projects will be on bigger needles and I'll give them a go then. I'm also keen, someone asked, because I asked on Instagram what kind of needles people liked, and someone did ask how pointy I like my needles, and the Zings are alright. I do find for the Fern sweater they're maybe not as pointy, but I have never really thought, wow, this is an amazing tip of a needle. Like I've never tried anything like it. But again, I would love to hear your opinions. That is definitely all the blabber that I'm going to do today. This goes out to you, Naptime Knitter, who's been asking me please film soon again. It's been ages. I have taken your feedback on board that you like the more chatty videos, and it's kind of nice to not feel too structured and just kind of talk about what's on my mind. So it's been lovely, and I hope to see you again soon. As always, I do keep very detailed descriptions down below if there's anything you're interested in. I also link my Ravelry. I will say that I use Ravelry mainly for tracking. I'm not part of the sort of social side of Ravelry, so if you send me a message on Ravelry, I might miss it. So basically the easiest way to get hold of me is usually through Instagram. I do try to get back to all my YouTube comments and check in every few days, but Instagram is the best way to go. And all of that will be linked down below as well. Thank you all so much for watching, and thank you so much for the nice feedback for my videos. See you soon. Bye.